And the Oscar goes to Halle Berry in Monsters Ball.
Halle Berry for Catwoman.
Halle Berry's Oscar win was one for the history books. A powerful performance as Letitia Musgrove in Monsters Ball earned her the award and marked the first time in history that a black woman took home the prize.
I have this. Thank you.
And then, this.
I never in my life thought I would be up here. Winning a Razzie!
Literally from best to worst, in under 2 years. In less time than it takes to make an actual movie, this actress went from the highest to the lowest acclaim, which begs the question, was it really Halle Berry's fault? Did she forget how to act in that 18-month window? Did she get her Oscar and decide to phone in the rest of her career? Did she lack a general understanding of cats? Maybe she understood cats too well. Or maybe, just maybe, there were other factors at play? We went back to ask the people who made Catwoman what exactly went wrong.
I want to thank the writers, all 20 of them.
I mean, it's never, ever a good sign when a movie has that many writers involved.
It's a room full of people who hate superhero movies making a superhero movie.
We all fail in their own different way. All 35 of us.
Nobody sets out to make a bad film. It doesn't mean that doesn't happen, but that's never the goal.
It took more than 10 years to get from this to this. During that decade, there was a revolving door of scripts, writers, actors, and executives involved with the project. By the time Halle Berry was standing in front of the camera, it was all but inevitable that she would end up here.
Winning a Razzie!
But if one thing is for certain, the Razzie win had much more to do with how business is conducted in Hollywood than one actor's performance.
I felt like if I can show up and collect an Oscar when my peers say I did well, I also have to be of this character that could show up when they tell me, maybe not so good that time.
This is the inside story of how too many cooks turned the dream of Catwoman into Halle Berry's personal nightmare.
Meow.
In 1989, Batman made over $400 million at the box office. Tim Burton, Michael Keaton, and Jack Nicholson launched a new era of the comic book film, one without the bams and pows and crashes of the Adam West days. Audiences liked what they saw, Warner Brothers liked making $400 million, and another round of Batman was quickly in the works. 3 years later, Batman Returns smashed into theaters. Keaton returned as Batman with Tim Burton again directing. A new writer, Daniel Waters, wrote the script and brought some new layers to the Batman universe.
And I'm probably the one male in town that never fantasized about writing a Batman movie. And I didn't know the lore as much as other people did, but I was fascinated by Catwoman.
Burton did what Burton does. The film was dark and deadly and a little more violent than the average parent felt comfortable with, while the plot strayed from the traditional DC characters, specifically with regard to a certain villainess.
So I came in with just all these ideas, and the first idea is I wanted her not to be a minx, cat burglar minx, but like somebody who's a real person who went through this, and I wanted her to be homemade, somebody who makes her own costume at home. And immediately Tim Burton holds up the hand and he starts drawing, and he immediately draws with stitches and what the Catwoman suit would be, and I think I had him there, even if I didn't know shit about Batman or Penguin.
Selina Kyle started as a meek secretary, made homely by a pair of ill-fitting glasses. When she survives an attempted murder and gets resuscitated by a bunch of feral cats, gone is the meekness, and she's reborn as a feisty, sensuous criminal who isn't all bad. Even before audiences got to meet these characters, producers were excited about what might become of Selina Kyle. The enthusiasm was widespread enough that Warner Brothers even changed the ending of Batman Returns in the 11th hour. And surely Daniel Waters would be okay with the iconic character he'd helped redefine surviving the film, right?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. I was like, how dare you bring my great characters back to life? Then I was like, when you watch it with an audience, you're totally for it. Especially now that the movie's screening Christmas, the cheers when her head raises up is like, okay, they made the right decision.
Apart from Catwoman surviving, there wasn't a real plan for how to move forward. Warner Brothers executives knew they liked Pfeiffer and the character. They knew it was worth spending a lot of money to shoot a new scene so they could continue the Catwoman story. But the details of how and when that would happen would need to be ironed out later. For now, the studio could move forward with options for Batman and Catwoman movies.
Maybe you can help me find the woman behind the cat.
Batman Returns was a hit by 1992 standards. In fact, it was the biggest movie of the year at the box office. The bar it didn't clear, however, was the one set by the first Batman. This created a bit of a conundrum. The franchise was still a winner, but what would come next? Would the financial pendulum swing back up, or would earnings drop again?
After the movie had come out, there was mixed reaction on the film, like I said, but no mixed reaction on the Catwoman character. Like, everybody loved the Catwoman character, so they thought it was the best way to please everybody. We can go do our Catwoman character. Meanwhile, Batman can be defanged and made into a Saturday morning cartoon with Joel Schumacher.
Would a standalone Catwoman movie be the next cash cow? Would audiences pay to watch both Batman and Catwoman in separate vehicles? The studio moved forward as if the answer to that question was, well, of course. Dividing their eggs between a Batman basket directed by Joel Schumacher and a Catwoman basket that would follow the model of the first two Batman movies. Variety reported in June of 1993 that both Burton and Pfeiffer were on board. Daniel Waters was hired to take the first crack at the standalone Catwoman script. While his initial vision of Catwoman immediately gelled with Tim Burton's, they didn't quite so easily agree on what to do with the character next.
Tim had a wild vision, you may have heard, to make a $16 million black and white movie, Selina just hanging out in a small town trying to get her life back together, and the Catwoman persona plaguing her, and like just a really nice, cool chamber piece. When I wanted to make a Batman movie without Batman, where the villains are male macho superheroes, and kind of the TV show The Boys before The Boys, it was a little bombastic. We thought we could work it out, like somehow come up with a happy medium. I think they were so freaked out by my first script that Tim realized I don't want to be in the superhero business anymore, so it kind of just died.
So, of course, that script never came close to a shooting draft. Whether it was the overt feminism or the quirky inventiveness or, other motives.
They blamed me for making Tim Burton even weirder. They thought I was a bad influence.
The people signing checks at Warner Brothers did not go for Waters' draft as it was written. Meanwhile, Tim Burton's eye was starting to wander, as a 1994 Variety report indicated that the director was waffling between Batman and an Edgar Allan Poe adaptation. Warner Brothers was still paying money to keep Pfeiffer attached in the role of Selina Kyle, so the Catwoman project wouldn't go away just because of a lost director and a missing script. However, while the project was finding its way, Warner's other franchise was still chugging along and doing its own thing.
Courage now, truth always. Batman forever.
Batman Forever returned Bruce Wayne and co. to box office glory. Joel Schumacher directed a version ripe with campy moments and big performances from the likes of Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones. Plus, Chris O'Donnell and Val Kilmer gave audiences the lovable Batman and Robin duo. This third Batman installment barely made reference to the most interesting character from Batman Returns, save for a belittling throwaway line.
You like strong women. I've done my homework. Or do I need skin-tight vinyl and a whip?
3 years had passed since Catwoman's introduction, and the way in which Warner Brothers could reintroduce her was getting a little murky. The character Pfeiffer created was dark and mysterious, but the Gotham of Batman Forever was bright and a little wacky. The newest Batman movie made a lot more money than the previous one, but the Selina Kyle character was still very alluring and Michelle Pfeiffer was still attached. Could the executives have their campy cake and eat their brooding cake too? The studio certainly wanted to make that happen, so they set about progressing the project as best they knew how, by hiring more people to write it.
This is 1,000 monkeys working at 1,000 typewriters.
The way a studio, and this is still true now, but the way a studio shows progress is to hire another writer. Like, oh, how's that project going, Bob? Oh, we just got another great writer on it, which is moving forward. And that's the illusion of motion, and everyone keeps their jobs.
Catwoman remained in the scripting stage while Batman plowed forward. Batman and Robin came to theaters in 1997, continuing in the campy style that moved the needle further from the world that gave rise to Catwoman. Still, writers were writing and pitching Catwoman scripts with Pfeiffer playing Selina Kyle in the original Tim Burton tone. As late as 1998, 6 years after Batman Returns was released, and after 2 Schumacher Batmans had come and gone, writers were still getting paid to deliver the script that would hopefully take Catwoman to the next level and make Warner Brothers $1 billion or whatever. The strategy for accomplishing that goal, however, was in flux. The Batman franchise had gone in a new direction, and perhaps Catwoman could have done the same thing, except for the financial ties to the actress who played Selina Kyle the first time.
To lock up Michelle Pfeiffer, they had paid her a considerable amount of money built around the rights of attaching her to the name Selina Kyle. She is Selina Kyle. And if anybody else plays Selina Kyle, they're going to have to write her a giant check.
That's my name, Maximilians. Don't wear it out or I'll make you buy me a new one.
In 1992, there was no doubt who could play Catwoman. Money was promised to ensure Pfeiffer would stay in the role. 6 years later, folks at Warner Brothers were a lot less sure of things. In a 2018 Twitter thread, screenwriter John August divulged how his own 1998 Catwoman pitch went. Catwoman at Warner's in 1998, sequel with Michelle Pfeiffer returning, producer excited, after pitch, exec insisted it needed to be Sarah Michelle Gellar and involve a hair washing scene, then showed me Matrix trailer. This marked a turning point, showing Warner Brothers executives might have finally resigned themselves to moving on from Michelle Pfeiffer. If that movie was going to happen, it would be done in one of 2 ways: the expensive way or the confusing way.
It's a blur.
While Warner Brothers brought in more and more writers to update previous writers' drafts, they eventually had to edit out the character of Selina Kyle altogether. By the time John Rogers came on as a writer in 2001, the character's name had been changed to Patience Price. The reason for the name change was far from arbitrary, even if the people writing the movie weren't always told about it.
That's interesting about the Patience Price, Selina Kyle. I actually hadn't been aware of that. I mean, we were aware that the character was Patience Price. We just kind of said, okay, fine. I did not know that there was a Michelle Pfeiffer generated restriction. They're so sneaky that way.
The goal was still to make a standalone Catwoman movie. The goalposts had moved considerably, having started in the world created by Burton, Pfeiffer, and Waters, and now residing in an unknown land with no actress, director, or locked script. Because Selina Kyle had to be ditched, so too did any backstory attaching the new Catwoman to the life lived by the previous one. There could still be a Catwoman. It was just legally required that she be different in every way from Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman. In a post-Pfeiffer world, there were a lot of options. Sarah Michelle Gellar wasn't seriously pursued, but Julia Roberts' name was bandied about, as was Nicole Kidman, formerly of Batman Forever fame.
Meow.
In the spring of 2001, Ashley Judd officially agreed to play the role. She was the first person attached since Pfeiffer, so this was a significant development. Warner Brothers jumped into action, bringing on a new writer to start fixing the previous 50 drafts compiled by all the other writers. That was the beginning of John Rogers' tenure as the Catwoman writer, and he was there for the entirety of Ashley Judd's run, which obviously didn't last. In early 2003, Judd chose Broadway over Catwoman, opting out of her contract to star in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which at least still had Cat in the title somewhere. It was a setback, but not one that could derail the momentum built up over the previous decade. Catwoman was a freight train bound for theaters, even if it was still without a conductor.
Movies have this dread momentum. Like, it's really hard to get a movie going downhill. But once it's going downhill, you cannot stop it. The movie is going to get made. Even as stuff starts going wrong and pieces start falling off, it's going to get made.
As long as Warner Brothers could find an actress, there would be a Catwoman movie.
Magnificent view.
It is, isn't it?
In the early 2000s, it was hard to find a brighter star than Halle Berry. She was coming off an Oscar-winning performance in Monsters Ball and loads of acclaim for her part in Die Another Day, not to mention playing Storm in the X-Men franchise. And, while we're not mentioning things, Berry had quite the decade leading up to that Oscar buzz. Bulworth, Losing Isaiah, Swordfish, and a dozen other titles played a part in Berry's ascension. The Bond and X-Men films added to her action star appeal, but she'd proven her acting chops every which way long before those films came out. Needless to say, it was a big win for Warner Brothers when Halle Berry agreed to step into the void left by Ashley Judd's departure. Berry signed on in 2003, and once she said yes, French filmmaker Pitoff also agreed to direct. For the first time since Burton, Waters, and Pfeiffer, the film had a trio of creatives. So, naturally, Rogers was promptly fired, after a 2-year tenure as the Catwoman writer.
Wrote the draft that Haley liked, and wrote the draft that Pitoff liked, and they both signed on, and Warner Brothers fired me the next week.
Good luck.
Attaching a new lead wasn't the end of pre-production. Now that Catwoman would be played by Halle Berry, the studio needed a script that would fit Halle Berry, which meant hiring new writers with no knowledge of where the project stood, where it had been, or where it was going. After Rogers left, the writing team of John Brancato and Michael Ferris stepped in.
And I sent them a bottle of scotch. I'm like, good luck. Welcome to the thing. Rewrite whatever the hell you want. It's your movie now. And they were always very, very nice about it.
He sent John Brancato, my partner at the time, a bottle of scotch, I think, and a note saying, when you want to stab your own eyes out with a pen, dealing with the studio notes, just take a slug of this instead.
For a little perspective on who wrote Catwoman, it's worth looking at who's actually listed in the credits. Rogers, Ferris, and Brancato are credited with creating the screenplay. The story, meanwhile, is attributed to Teresa Rebeck and the duo of Ferris and Brancato. 2 years of writing and no story credit for Rogers.
There are legitimately 2 beats of my script in the entire movie.
Even though Rogers wrote Catwoman draft for 2 years and helped get Halle Berry on board, his draft was changed so much that he ultimately lost the story credit. Instead, that accolade goes to a mix of Teresa Rebeck, who came on in the late 1990s and updated the Daniel Waters draft that had already been updated by a handful of uncredited writers, and the writing duo who replaced John Rogers in 2003. That writing duo was notably fired, replaced, and actually rehired.
John and I were actually writers number, I think, 15 and 17 out of, I think, 27 writers altogether on Catwoman. So it's hard to get a full picture of it. They brought us on after John Rogers, then they fired us. Then someone else came in, and they hired again.
All of these credits are decided through a process called arbitration, through which each draft of a movie's screenplay is analyzed to determine which writer gets which credit. It's how you end up with credit blocks that include ands and ampersands and 3 lines worth of names. It's also how Daniel Waters got 0 on-screen credit for the film, which, as it turns out, was fine by him.
A truck backed up in my front yard and put all these scripts in the front yard and said, do you want to arbitrate? And I'm like, I was the first name of then 34 more names. And I'm like, thank you, no.
The point is, Warner Brothers was burning through Catwoman writers at an impressive pace, while still holding on to certain things from certain drafts, to the point where writers who worked 5 years apart with countless drafts between their respective tenures are credited with creating the story.
Every now and then it would be, I don't know, we had a scene in the zoo where she falls asleep and wakes up next to a tiger. I'm not even sure we came up with that. I think we pulled that from an earlier draft. But that's a sexy moment, and that just got shot down because no tigers. You did keep running into roadblocks that were just generated by the fact that they had done something already and they didn't feel like it worked.
Maybe Daniel Waters wrote something about tigers in 1994. Maybe Teresa Rebeck had a weird tiger idea in 1999. Whoever it was, things like tigers were off the table in 2003, but no one told that to the current writers who were trying desperately to write a script that wouldn't make Halle Berry quit. Speaking of, why didn't Halle Berry run for the hills? As she saw writers coming and going in draft after draft changing the story, what kept her around?
Well, at that time, it was a chance to, as a black woman, to lead a franchise, and we weren't actually doing that. You know, we didn't have the opportunity to do that.
There was no shortage of offers and opportunities for Berry, coming off multiple blockbusters and an Oscar win. Still, as superhero movies were exploding in every direction, very few were led by women, and absolutely none promoted a woman of color in the lead role. Batman, Spider-Man, and X-Men were the talk of the town. Storm and Rogue and Jean Grey were solid characters, but they were part of the ensemble. For a woman to lead one of these franchises, that was an untrodden trail.
I've always operated my career by taking big risks, and sometimes when you risk big, you fail, but it doesn't mean it's the end when you fail. That means you've learned something, you know. So that was a big risk, but if that would have worked like gangbusters, that would have been a huge win, not only for me, but for Black women in that space.
At the same time, action films were opening up to the idea of having a female lead. Tomb Raider and Charlie's Angels had plenty of box office success and critical acclaim. In fact, Berry's 007 spin-off featuring her character Jinx from Die Another Day got everything but the green light to be filmed for a 2004 release. Previous Bond scribes Neil Purvis and Robert Wade were commissioned to write the script. Stephen Frears was attached to direct. Michael Madsen was set to return in his role as Damien Falco, and Javier Bardem was floated for the male lead. And then, because Hollywood studios are fickle and silly, MGM walked away. The executives balked at the $80 million price tag proposed by producer Barbara Broccoli, even though that was about half of what it cost to make Die Another Day. Broccoli in particular took issue with MGM reversing course and held on to that resentment for years. Producers were coming around to the idea of female action stars, but there were only so many parts to go around. Having already lost the Bond project, Berry was even more committed to doing Catwoman and being the first Black woman to lead a comic book movie. Even as executives failed to pin down what the movie was going to be about, Halle Berry remained.
I am Catwoman. Hear me roar.
In 1993, Catwoman was a Burton-esque hero with lots of flaws and a whip and a complicated relationship with Bruce Wayne. That was the character audiences loved and wanted to see return. 10 years later, the movie was finally getting made, and the character had been stripped down to nothing and rebuilt as some kind of Frankenstein's monster made up of body parts found in 20 different writers' drafts of the script. Because of the self-imposed limitations that came from trying to make the movie happen with Michelle Pfeiffer, Warner Brothers was dealing with a sort of filmmaking Rubik's Cube. Every time one thing changed, a bunch of things changed. And things kept changing because the people making the movie didn't have a firm grasp of why they were making a Catwoman movie. Without a cohesive storyline or the ability to draw parallels to the 1993 Catwoman world, the executives seemed drawn to other, less nuanced ways to make Catwoman interesting.
Don't tell me. Naked, sexual charisma.
Even as the film broke barriers by having a female lead, a lot of decisions were made that overtly feminized the story and characters. The villain is the CEO of a cosmetics company. Catwoman's outfit is still made of tight leather like in Batman Returns, just significantly less of it. Her superpowers make her stronger, sure, but the real focus is how they make her sexier.
What a perfect idea.
Pfeiffer's Catwoman was fierce and seductive, and the two balanced well. That film earned the sexy moments by having plenty of cartwheels and fights and flips. While Berry was plenty nimble in her role, the 2004 Catwoman was notably low on action.
I was not involved in the production end in terms of being anywhere near the actual production. We were not on set. So I can't tell you why the movie got sort of dialed down the way it did on the action front. I mean, it wasn't until we watched a rough cut that John and I looked at each other and thought, this is an action movie with, like, no action in it. But, I mean, we'd written scenes with, like, you know, boats in flames moving down the river while Catwoman jumps from a bridge overhead, and then they fight each other with a whip and a shard of broken glass. None of it made it to the screen, and I don't know if that was for budgetary reasons or it didn't fit the overall vision or vibe of the movie, but it was odd. It's a very un-actiony action movie, you know.
Instead of leaning into the crime fighting, the film played up the feline physicality, both in how Patience Phillips moved and interacted with the world. She hissed at dogs, ate lots of tuna, and rubbed catnip all over her face.
Catnip.
Through the many drafts of the script, producers pushed the movie in a less substantive, more sexual direction. Meanwhile, the feline focus can also be attributed to the director. Pitoff, who was admittedly not a huge superhero or comic book fan, was interested in the merger of cat and woman. He talked about what excited him most about directing this film during a 2020 interview on the Heart of the Industry podcast.
I was really very excited by dealing with the female, and especially Catwoman, because it's a feline. It's a mix between a cat, a big cat, and a woman. So you have this feral component as well as kind of sexual, and sexual in more in a sensual approach.
The effort to keep Catwoman sexy had an obvious effect on how the story developed, or didn't develop, as the case may be.
By the time they hired us for the second time, there was clearly this sense of just praying for some kind of, magic bullet or something that was gonna suddenly. I mean, we came back. I remember we were talking to him on the phone about what next? Where do we go from here? And we threw out the idea of a basketball game, a one-on-one game between Patience Price and John Lowe, or whatever he was called, Benjamin Bratt and Halle Berry. And they loved that. And that got us another gig. I mean, that got us, another paycheck to do another draft. And I'm like, one-on-one basketball scene, anybody could write that. But they made it sexy basketball.
Scenes like this illustrate the aimlessness of a film that was working through 27 writers and a few thousand drafts. It's all but impossible for a script to keep a solid through line when the people crafting the story keep getting fired and replaced and have to answer to executives who are trying to keep the thread on 10 years worth of drafts.
They were just trying to make the best of that situation. The whole writing process for a lot of those movies at the time, and I think, because of the nature of how we developed movies at the time, was just trying to come up with the least bad solution to what people wanted.
Ferris and Brancato were writing basketball scenes to keep their job. They were fighting to come up with ideas that didn't reference Selina Kyle's story or anything the executives didn't like from a draft written by any of the previous writers. The ideas that got everyone excited about Catwoman back in the 90s were off limits. Writers couldn't fall back on the insanity of Gotham City or use other DC heroes and villains to give the movie extra dimensions. And every time those rules got too tricky to comply with, another writer was brought in to hopefully solve the problem.
I would have been out of a job, and I think they would have been better off, buckling down with Teresa Rebeck or John Rogers or whoever of the 14 preceding writers and try to get them to get it right.
The disparity between what people wanted and what they got is very apparent when you watch the different Catwoman in action. Michelle Pfeiffer got to duke it out with thugs and the Dark Knight himself, while Halle Berry's big showdown was against a cosmetic company executive in a pantsuit, and the fight's climax featured way more slapping than the typical action movie finale. Worse still, at the end of that fight, when Sharon Stone's character, Laurel Hedare, is hanging on for dear life, it seems she's most upset by the fact that her face is all tarnished from fighting. She wanted to make money off a face cream that ruined women's faces, and then her face suffered the same fate. True beauty is on the outside, kids. Thanks for watching Catwoman. Weird themes of sexuality and gender are pervasive throughout the film, from Catwoman's revealing reveal, to the director's interest in exploring the feminine aspects of feline, to the central plot point of beauty cream as the antagonist's weapon. All those action and acting chops that made Halle Berry an Oscar-winning superstar took a backseat to how sexy a female superhero could be. At the time, Berry was hired to play the part. Years later, with more experience and hindsight, she feels things could have gone a little differently.
The actor and director that I am now, I would have made sure that the story would have been more substantive. The story would have been saving the world like all the superheroes do, not just saving women from a face cream that cracks their face off. I think that was a large part of what was wrong with the movie. It didn't have the scope that all of those movies actually have.
To that point, the stakes were a lot higher in just about every other comic book movie that came before Catwoman. In Batman Returns, there are multiple murders and kidnappings as the Penguin sends all of Gotham into chaos. In Batman Forever, Two-Face kills a bunch of innocent people because he wants to know Batman's real identity, while the Riddler is busy building a brain-sucking device to use on everyone in the city. In Batman and Robin, there's a chance that all of Gotham City will be frozen, and so on and so on. There's no good reason Catwoman couldn't have faced similar threats. Warner Brothers had an interesting and exciting character, an existing fan base who loved the DC universe, and an actress who could handle the badassery as well as the nuanced performance needed to play a flawed hero. They just forgot the reason the movie was being made in the first place.
Somebody has to love it. And I get called in to fix stuff sometimes, and the first question I ask now is, who loves this? Who's willing to ruin their life for the next 3 years to make this?
In 10 years of development, it's safe to say the executives in charge had fallen out of love with the movie.
It's a total bloody disaster.
When Halle Berry finally came on board, she loved the idea of carrying a franchise in a way that a black woman had never done before. She stayed on in an attempt to do something big. After the movie was done and branded as an absolute flop, every executive who played a part in making the film so ridiculous got to hide their heads in the sand and pretend it wasn't their fault. Meanwhile, Halle Berry showed up at the Razzies with her Academy Award in hand to say this.
Because when I was a kid, my mother told me that if you could not be a good loser, then there's no way you could be a good winner. If you weren't able to take criticism, then you were not worthy of getting praise. So I've entered into my career of acting, and I started off in beauty pageants. It's probably another good reason why I'm here tonight. Started off in beauty pageants, and I won the first 3 in a row. Just won them. I got to the Miss USA pageant, and there I was on the stage with the first runner-up. And she was this buxom, blonde, blue-eyed Texan. And I looked at her and I thought, oh God, I'm probably gonna lose. Sure enough, they called the winner. It wasn't me, it was her. I looked at her, and all I could hear was my mother's voice in my head, and I thought, okay, here's my chance. But all I wanted to do was fucking slap the shit out of her. So, as you can imagine, I want to fucking slap the shit out of these Razzie people that brought me here tonight. But I won't do that. I'll do what my mother taught me, and I'll stand here graciously. I'll take the criticism, take it as a lesson learned, and I hope to God I never see these people ever again.
Of all the people to blame for Catwoman's critical and financial failure, Halle Berry is pretty low on the list. She agreed to play a big part in a big movie, and by all accounts tried her darndest. A decade's worth of bad creative choices made by non-creatives landed squarely at Halle Berry's feet, and there was only so much she could do. And still, after it all fell apart, she stood up on the Razzie stage, something no other Worst Actor or Actress winner had done before, and delivered a pretty great speech. The inside story of Catwoman reminds us that it's easy to go after the face of a film. What we see on the screen comes on the heels of a lot of work by a lot of people, and many of the people making the most impactful decisions get to hide from the criticism once the movie gets released. At any point along the way, there could have been a different actress playing Catwoman or a different script. Alas, the Hollywood machine took charge and churned out a film with an 8% score on Rotten Tomatoes. Halle Berry said she learned from the experience, and the rest of the movie industry would be wise to do the same.